Daniel Jeremiah of NFL.com went ahead and released his third mock draft of the mock draft season. So in this video, I want to go ahead and react to his 3.0 NFL mock draft. Subscribe if you're new. Let's hop into it. So as you can see, Daniel Jeremiah 2025 NFL Mock Draft 3.0. We're going to go through basically almost every single pick, give some insights on it, and give my opinion on each pick. We're going to begin with number 1, Cam Ward. It does sort of feel like the Tennessee Titans are leaning towards taking a quarterback with the first overall pick. What will be interesting to see is if a team potentially like the New York Giants, or I don't know, a team like the Raiders, maybe they feel like they can get another quarterback. I don't know. If one of these teams decides to potentially give up a haul of draft picks to move up to number 1 to get Cam Ward, I don't think that's going to happen. The only team that I think is likely to do that would be a team like the New York Giants, but realistically speaking, I do not see them doing that. I think they're probably going to stick in at 3 or maybe move into pick 2. Either way, I do think Tennessee will end up with a quarterback, whether it's Shedeur or Cam Ward. In this particular mock, they have him taking Cam Ward, but I have seen other mock drafts where they've taken Shedeur Sanders with the first overall pick, so I think it could go either way, but it is seemingly likely that Cam Ward will be the first quarterback off the board. So I like this pick for Tennessee. You get off of Will Levis as your starting quarterback. You get sort of a prototypical quarterback prospect in the modern game where he can be an explosive playmaker while also having a dynamic arm, some rushing ability, but still having a couple flaws to his game that obviously need to be checked out. Pick 2 is interesting because the Cleveland Browns go ahead and take Abdul Carter instead of taking a guy like Shedeur Sanders or maybe Jackson Dart. They decide to stick in with number 2 and take Abdul Carter, despite the fact there is some injury concerns with, I believe, his foot. This one's even more interesting because they are able to bring back Myles Garrett, so they don't really necessarily need an edge rusher 1, but their rusher 2 is it's a pretty big need right now. They don't really have a go-to guy next to Myles Garrett, so bringing in Abdul Carter I think makes this defensive line just unbelievably dominant, especially if Abdul Carter does live up to the hype that we expect him to actually meet. We're talking about a team that could arguably have the best duo of pass rushers in the NFL, with one side Myles Garrett, who's arguably the best pass rusher in the NFL, and then on the other side Abdul Carter. And what's fun about this is they don't really play like each other. Like, Myles Garrett's a huge, massive individual that can win in a variety of ways, but Abdul Carter's a little bit leaner, obviously a linebacker transferred or a linebacker changed positions to more of an edge rusher, so he's a little leaner, a little bit more of a speed guy who also has some technique stuff. So that's going to be a dynamic pass rushing duo that they just can make every single tackle absolutely fearful for their lives. Third is the Giants. It's going to be really interesting to see what ends up happening for the Giants at the quarterback position. There is some speculation that Jameis Winston could come to town. There's some speculation about Russell Wilson. There were some talks about Aaron Rodgers. I don't think any of those quarterback options should be, 1, their long-term option, or 2, honestly, their 2025 option either. If Brian Dable and Joe Shane want to keep their jobs, I kind of feel like they have to take a quarterback with either the 3rd overall pick or whatever pick they end up having here. In this situation, Cam Ward's off the board, so you can't take him. Number 2, Abdul Carter, so I guess the likely pick here would be Shedeur Sanders. It does sound like the Giants are okay taking Shedeur Sanders. A lot of reports have come out that they actually do like Shedeur Sanders and they view him as being worthy of the 3rd overall pick. So by all means, I could definitely see him going at this spot here to the New York Giants. It would fill a positional need. They definitely need a quarterback because they just don't have one on the roster right now. Again, the interesting thing will be, what if the Browns take Shedeur Sanders? Then what would the New York Giants do with the 3rd overall pick? Because if that's the case, then they're really screwed and they're either going to have to reach on Jackson Dart, who I personally do not think is worthy, arguably in my opinion, of a 1st round pick, but definitely not a 3rd overall pick. Or you're going to go ahead and just take an Abdul Carter or a Travis Hunter and then just pray and hope that, you know, somebody falls into the 2nd round like a Milroe or Jackson Dart or Quinn Ewers, somebody like that, and maybe take a flyer on them to see if they can work out. All in all, this is what I think most Giants fans are probably hoping for, and especially coaching staff for the Giants. This is probably what they're hoping for, so I can definitely see it happening. Then at number 4, we get Travis Hunter going to the New England Patriots. Now, I've heard a lot of people talking about whether Travis Hunter can play both sides of the football. Is he going to play both sides of the football? Will he be a receiver? Will he be a corner? I think depending on the situation is what's ultimately going to dictate what Hunter ends up being at the NFL level. You look at a team like the New England Patriots that need a lot of help in both the receiving core and maybe could use a little bit of help as a corner too. If the Patriots were to take Travis Hunter, I would assume that it would be to be a full-time receiver because they already brought in Carlton Davis. They already have Christian Gonzalez. And maybe he could be like, I don't know, a 3rd corner for them, maybe a nickel. Hell, he can probably even play safety. He's just absolutely a fantastic piece to add to your defense or to your offense. So I could see this being a situation where he has to carve or roll out on the defensive end, but is likely going to be a wide receiver 1 for Drake May in that offense. Again, I personally do believe that Travis Hunter can play both sides, not maybe every single play, but if you're telling me that he plays 100% of snaps at corner and like 50% of snaps at receiver, I think it's probably pretty possible of him to be able to do that. The question then would be, how much of a longevity would he have in his career playing both sides? And I'd have to imagine that if he's playing both sides pretty consistently, that the longevity of his career is going to be diminished because of that. Because you just don't really see players playing, 150% of snaps on the football field. Like, most players play up to 100%. And if you're Travis Hunter, you're playing two different positions and you're going to have to play a lot of snaps at both potentially. So it will be interesting to see if he can play both sides. For the sake of the Patriots, they need more help in the receiving corps. So if they were to take Travis Hunter here, I think it's likely to be more of a receiver. And I guess as a corner, maybe he can come in on certain packages as like an outside, a nickel, maybe even a safety in some packages. Moving on to number 5 here, we end up with a bit of a surprise pick in Jalen Walker. Now, I'll be straight up honest with you. I don't think Jalen Walker is worthy of a 5th overall pick, especially because the Jaguars don't really need a pass rusher because they already have Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker. And yes, the interior of the defensive line is pretty weak, but he's a edge rusher. I mean, yes, he can play off-ball linebacker, which is what I would assume they would use him as. But I feel like this is a bit of a heavy reach here for the Jacksonville Jaguars. They need more help in the secondary. They need more help in the interior of the defensive line. You have Mason Graham on the board. We have Will Johnson, Jahdae Barron on the board. I like Jalen Walker as a prospect. I think he has an extremely high ceiling because of just how athletic and how physically gifted he is. But for the 5th overall pick, this is a huge reach and, in my opinion, a huge project for the Jacksonville Jaguars to take. And I just don't think that it's worthy of risking the 5th overall pick, especially on a Jaguars team that has other needs out there outside of an edge rusher. If this was the pick, I'll be honest with you, I really would not like the pick. I would have rather them maybe taken a Tetairoa McMillan to pair alongside what you already have in Brian Thomas Jr. I would have rather them went Tyler Warren to give this room a tight end. I would have rather them taken Will Johnson because they need an outside corner. I would have rather them taken Mason Graham. I just think there's a lot of other needs for this team, and a project edge rusher that can start as an off-ball linebacker and work inside to play a bit more of an edge rusher at times. Just don't view that as being the biggest need for this team. I feel like their front 7 is pretty solid. I mean, it's not great by any means. You could definitely add pieces to it. But for your 5th overall pick to take a project player, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of this pick. I would be a little bit surprised if this was ultimately the pick. This is actually the first time that I've seen the Jaguars not mocked a Mason Graham or a Will Johnson or somebody like that. This is the first time I've seen them taking a edge rusher like Jalen Walker. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan. Raiders taking Ashton Jeanty. This seems to be kind of the brewing consensus for the 6th overall pick. It's either going to be a receiver and maybe like a Ted McMillan or somebody like that, or it's going to be like Ashton Jeanty. And well, yes, the Raiders are in a position now where they need to surround Geno Smith with as much talent as possible. And you might say like, well, why would the Raiders take a running back at pick 6 when they could just wait for the 2nd round and potentially take a Quinshad Judkins or a Caleb Johnson or somebody like that? And my counter to that would be, none of those guys are Ashton Jeanty. And realistically speaking here, if you were to take a McMillan at 6 here or a Will Johnson at 6 here, I don't think those players as prospects are as good of a prospect as Ashton Jeanty. And this is a Raiders team that has not addressed the running back position in basically any way so far. So taking Ashton Jeanty would not only be a massive upgrade, but it would be a massive help for this offense to just support Geno Smith with other options on the football field. Again, you have some receiving options. Obviously, Brock Bowers is fantastic, but this team needs, I don't want to say an identity change, but just needs somebody who can be a change of pace option for this offense. Like, you can't throw the ball every single play. If you have Ashton Jeanty, that is your first down guy. Like, you are giving him the ball and letting him work over and over again. Like, this guy's going to get 25 carries a game, which the Raiders just desperately need because they just don't have that guy right now. So I don't hate the pick at all here. I definitely think it makes a lot of sense. Yes, you could potentially add a receiver here and then take a running back in the 2nd round, but I would rather take the running back here and then take a receiver in the 2nd round. So that's just my opinion. All right, Jets, go ahead and take Armand Membu. With the departure of Morgan Moses, this does make sense. It is starting to look a bit more clear now that Armand Membu, from a lot of scouts' eyes and analysts' eyes, is becoming the offensive tackle 1 in this year's draft class over guys like Will Campbell and Kelvin Banks, which have sort of been the consensus 1 and 2 at the tackle positions. So Armand Membu kind of steps in there now, and it kind of makes some sense. Good size, good film, great athleticism, tested extremely well at the combine. You know, you look at Will Campbell, who did some good things in, you know, these so far this offseason, and Kelvin Banks also did some fine things too, but they haven't really stood out like an Armand Membu. I feel like there's been more concerns with Will Campbell and his arm length, and Kelvin Banks and his overall athleticism, more so than like Armand Membu, who's passed every single test with flying colors. So for the Jets, who took a really good player last year in Olu Fashanu, who's going to be their future left tackle, you get Armand Membu to play now opposite of him, which put him in at the right tackle spot, have him replace Morgan Moses. And I'm looking at that Jets offensive line, and it's looking really good. I guess the question then becomes, you know, is Fields the long-term answer? Who's going to play receiver opposite of Garrett Wilson, and who's your tight end? But I think they could probably address that in the later portion of this draft. For the sake of the pick here, I like the pick. Surround Justin Fields with a great offensive line, and then find some pieces in free agency and the rest of the draft to, you know, give some more weapons to Fields. 8, the Carolina Panthers go Mason Graham. This is the farthest I've seen Mason Graham fall in a couple of different mock drafts. Now, I haven't seen all of them, so maybe there's other mock drafts out there where he falls a lot more. Carolina brings in Tershawn Horton, brings in a couple other pieces on the defensive line, but adding a Mason Graham, I just think makes a lot of sense. I think in this situation, you would probably prefer an Abdul Carter or a Jalen Walker maybe, or a Will Johnson over Mason Graham, because they feel like they've maybe already done some work at that defensive tackle position. But I understand the talent of Mason Graham is available, so just don't overthink it. And this is a Panthers team that sometimes can overthink things. So in this situation, just not overthinking it, taking the best player on the board on Mason Graham, I think does make some sense here. Mason Graham is getting ultimate prospect fatigue right now. People are finding any little small issue with his game, like, oh, he's not the biggest guy, he's not the strongest guy, oh, his arms are a little bit smaller, which these are legitimate concerns. But man, you turn on the film and this dude can just straight up play. I like this pick for the Panthers here. It falls right into their laps, and they just do not overthink it. 9, the New Orleans Saints take Jahad Campbell. This is one of my favorite players in this year's draft class. This is somebody who I personally believe can play off-ball linebacker like he's been doing for Bama. But I also do believe that this is somebody that can play a lot of different positions, like an outside linebacker role, an edge rushing role, just whatever a team needs him to become. I think he can become it. It's just about getting him, you know, properly trained in that position and getting him some technique help if he's going to become an edge rusher. A team like the Saints, who have actually done a decent job of kind of filling out some of their needs, bringing in Jahad Campbell, I think makes a lot of sense. He can be a versatile guy who can give them some juice off the edge, while also being, you know, an off-ball linebacker and being somebody young in that room, which this team has kind of needed the past couple years. I will say I'm a little surprised they didn't have him taking Will Johnson, because the secondary for the Saints is very suspect. I mean, you have Kool-Aid McKinstry, but the rest of it, Alontae Taylor, I'm not really buying the hype on. So I think the Saints might end up taking like a Will Johnson here, but taking Jahad Campbell, I think, is a totally fine pick. 10, the Chicago Bears take Will Campbell. This has felt like it's been the pick for like the past 4 or 5 months now, that Will Campbell was going to be a Chicago Bear. I will say it's not necessarily the pick that I would do right now. If in a hypothetical situation, if Armand Membu doesn't go top 10, and if you're the Bears and you have Membu and Will Campbell on the board, I'm probably taking Armand Membu because I view him being as a better tackle prospect. And that's just because I think Will Campbell is better to play as a guard. He just has small arms, and that's going to be a legitimate issue if you want to go up against these great, long, lengthy pass rushers. Now, granted, this is a situation where the Bears are probably just going to take the best offensive lineman available and just not overthink it, and you get Will Campbell here. I don't have an issue with it, because if he doesn't work out at tackle, he can be your long-term replacement for, I would suppose, probably Jonah Jackson, because he's the most injury-prone. But even then, you know, you can fill him basically anywhere on this offensive line and just kind of let him work. I would have preferred Kelvin Banks here, because I think he's the best pass-blocking tackle. If you're going to go tackle, I would have went Kelvin Banks, but I can totally understand taking Will Campbell. My next question is going to be, who's going to play running back for them? Are you going to trust DeAndre Swift? Maybe they'll address that in the second round in this hypothetical situation, so I don't have that big of an issue with it. 11, San Francisco takes Jahdae Barron, another one of those players I absolutely love. Texas bias, obviously, I love him. Texas, hook 'em. San Francisco desperately needs some help in the secondary. Jahdae Barron fills a ton of needs for this defense. He can play outside corner, he can play in the slot, he can play safety, whatever you really need him to play on any given downs. This guy can step in there and instantly make plays. He's also just a really good dude that I think a lot of people are going to fall in love with. So I like this pick for the San Francisco 49ers. It makes a lot of sense. As Jeremiah has said, the 49ers defense has seen a lot of departures this offseason. So bringing in one of the more consistent players in Jahdae Barron, I think makes a lot of sense. All right, Dallas takes Matthew Golden here. This is a bit of an interesting one. Tetairoa McMillan is still on the board here, and they pass him up to take Matthew Golden, who maybe in this situation, Daniel Jeremiah believes that Golden is a better receiving prospect than McMillan, because I think if McMillan was available here at pick 12, he'd have to be considered for Dallas because he would give Dallas a size element they don't really have in the receiving core, as well as an outside, true outside receiver which they don't have. Golden is an outside receiver, but he's only about 6 foot. But I like the pick here. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Matthew Golden. I think he's a great route runner. I think he's has great, almost incredible hands, to be honest with you. Like, he catches everything. Very fast, had a good combine, ran like a 4.29, something like that. So I think it checks out. I would just be a little bit surprised that they took Golden over Tetairoa McMillan just because of the pure size of McMillan. But and Matthew Golden next to CeeDee Lamb, and you pair him next to Jake Ferguson, like that's a nice little group of receivers there for the Cowboys. Miami takes Malachi Starks here. Obviously, you lose out on Javon Holland, you lose out on a lot of different safeties, and safety core for the Miami Dolphins looks a little bit weak right now. Malachi Starks makes a ton of sense. I wouldn't be shocked if this is Nick Eamon-Ward because of just the size element of him and the versatility to potentially play a linebacker. But if you want a pure safety prospect, somebody you don't have to worry about with versatility and whatnot, Malachi Starks can play more of a free safety role. Like Jeremiah says, he can play a nickelback role or a high safety role. Like, I think Starks can just play whatever position you need him to, and he's just going to make a lot of big time plays for the Miami Dolphins. This one makes a lot of sense. Interior defensive line is also another need, and also offensive line, but taking Malachi Starks I think totally checks out. Indianapolis takes Tyler Warren. I don't want to go into too much detail about this one, but yeah, I mean, it just makes a lot of sense. Tyler Warren fills in a dire need for this team, and he's a good run blocker who can help Jonathan Taylor in this offensive line, which, by the way, it lost some pieces this offseason. But he's also a great receiving threat for Anthony Richardson to, dump the ball off. He's consistent. He can play multiple positions, whether it's a fullback role or an inline blocking role. He can even step out and play more of a receiving role. Hell, he can even play quarterback. So I like this pick for the Colts. It's just the pick that makes the most sense. Will Johnson falls all the way to 15, and they say, while inconsistencies popped up in Johnson's 2024 tape, it's hard to find big, rangy corners with his ball skills. Yeah, I think he's kind of getting the prospect fatigue I talked about with Mason Graham. I think a lot of Michigan players are kind of getting that, where we're almost getting a little bit tired of mocking them early. So we're starting to figure out any sort of small issues they have and kind of pushing them down the draft board. And that's kind of happening with Will Johnson. His 2024 tape undeniably was not as good as his 2023 tape, but he also was injured for a chunk of the season, so he didn't get to show off his, his full arsenal the entire year. But he still made some big time plays. Again, like he says, he's big, he's rangy, he can move around quite well. I think he's pretty solid in coverage, both zone and man coverage. So for Atlanta, a team that I think probably should prioritize edge rushers, if you are in a situation here where Will Johnson's on the board, I mean, I'd probably take Will Johnson over a Mike Green or Shamar Stewart. So this one, I think it makes a lot of sense as well. Arizona's here, and they take Gray Zabel. The interior of the offensive line for the Cardinals is a bit of a need. I'm a little surprised he didn't have them taking an interior defensive lineman, because they did add Josh Sweat to the edge rushing room, but I feel like adding a big physical presence on the interior of the defensive line would really be nice here. This is pretty high for Gray Zabel. He's somebody who I've seen mocked late first, early seconds. This is the first time that I've really seen him going in like the middle of the first round. So while I don't hate the pick, I think it would be a quality pickup for this offensive line. I think they probably could have done a little bit better by taking like a Kenneth Grant in the first round here, and maybe taking somebody in the interior of the O-line in like the second round. But I got no issues with the pick. I think it makes a lot of sense. I just would probably go interior defensive line. Cincinnati takes Mike Green. Now, there are some off the field concerns with Mike Green that need to be checked out and need to get cleared before he probably goes this early. But if it does get checked out, I do think Mike Green has great tape, especially if they are able to keep Trey Hendrickson. It would be awesome to see him paired up next to him and just have two dynamic pass rushers. But let's say hypothetically they do trade Trey Hendrickson and they need a pass rusher. I think Mike Green could be that go-to guy early on, while also still having a pretty high ceiling to become a better player as time does go on. So I don't hate the pick here. I think it makes a lot of sense. Just kind of comes down to, the off-the-field issues. Seattle takes Colston Loveland. This is pretty interesting because I believe they still have Noah Fant. Let me confirm this. Yeah, Noah Fant is already on the roster, not to mention AJ Barner. Now, I will say neither one of those guys are the receiving threat that Colston Loveland is. But again, I hate to say it, but Tetairoa McMillan's on the board here. And yes, I think Colston Loveland's a fine prospect, but this team could really use a true outside receiver that can, win some 50-50s and make some big splashy plays downfield. And they don't really have that right now because they have Cooper Kupp and they have Jackson Smith and Jigba, and then Marcus Valdes-Scantling, who can make some plays downfield, but more of like a speed element. I don't hate the pick of Colston Loveland because they could use a tight end. So yeah, I mean, I get that, but I don't know if McMillan's on the board here. I think you have to consider him, and I just think he'd be a better player than Colston Loveland for the Seahawks team. So maybe maybe the thought process of you already have two great receivers, you already have Marcus Valdes-Scantling, you just need to add a big physical tight end that could do a lot of different things, who's a great receiving tight end. I guess that's sort of the thought process here, but I would have personally went somewhere else. 19, the Buccaneers take Donovan Ezaraku, somebody whose draft stock is also been on the rise here lately. This is a team in Tampa Bay that could really use a go-to pass rusher. This team could also use a cornerback as well, but there really isn't a cornerback available worthy here. A little surprised we're not seeing a Shamar Stewart in this spot here, or a James Pierce Jr. potentially, but if he views Donovan Ezaraku as a better pass rusher, it makes sense. I mean, 16.5 sacks last season, so a gifted pass rusher, a very good speed rusher. Not sure what you're getting out of him as a run defender, but you know, you already have some guys there in that defensive line. So I think I understand. I don't hate the pick at all here. Again, probably would have went Shamar Stewart because he might be maybe a better scheme fit, but I have no issue with Donovan Ezaraku here. Denver takes Amarian Hampton. Now, for some reason, there seems to be this narrative around that Amarian Hampton is nowhere near as good as Ashton Genty. Amarian Hampton is a really good prospect and easily worthy of a first-round pick. I've seen so many different people complaining about, oh, why is my team taking Amarian Hampton in the first round when I can wait into the second round to get a good running back? I just think Amarian Hampton is very, very good, and he's better than some of those second-round running backs. I think we sometimes, I don't want to say we're overrating the second-round running backs, but they're going in the second round for a reason. Like, Amarian Hampton is a fantastic prospect, and if he's available here at pick 20, which I think he very well could end up going here. And Denver has had a need at running back these past few years. They just don't really have that dynamic guy. They thought they had it with Javonte Williams, but obviously injuries kind of derailed his career. Now he's a Dallas Cowboy. I mean, Amarian Hampton steps into Sean Payton's offense and just becomes such a huge part of this offense and would become such a huge help for Bo Nix. With Colston Loveland off the board here, you're not going to reach on like a Mason Taylor or anything like that. Again, McMillan is on the board here, but they already kind of have a guy in Cortland Sutton, so you already kind of have that outside guy. But man, bringing in Amarian Hampton, I think, is a huge fixer-upper for that offense. He's a change-of-pace guy, can get you easy first downs, could be a great 1st and 10 guy who can get you 5-6 yards on a first down and set you up nicely on second down. This team likes to run play action. It's really hard to run play action when you don't have a good running back. Now you have a good running back, so I love the pick here. Oh boy, controversial pick here. 21, the Steelers take Jackson Dart. Now, I want to make this abundantly clear. I don't think Jackson Dart is a first-round prospect. And I'll go one step further. I don't think Jackson Dart is a second-round pick option either. I think he's more of like a third-round and plus quarterback prospect. With that said, quarterbacks always get a bit of a rub forward because, of course, they play the hardest position on the football field. And I can see why teams fall in love with Jackson Dart. He has a lot of the intangibles. He seems to be a really good dude, good confident guy, good quarterback, physique, good look to him, good feel about him. But man, you turn on the tape and it's not bad by any means because he makes a lot of good plays here and there. It's just, you know, Ole Miss runs a very easy system where it's a lot of one reads. You don't have to sit back and go through your options. I will say if Pittsburgh does end up with Aaron Rodgers and they work with him for a year or two and Dart can sit behind him for those years, I would like the pick a lot more. But in a hypothetical situation where Pittsburgh doesn't get Aaron Rodgers and they're forced to start Jackson Dart next year, I just think you'd be setting him up for massive failure at that point. Like, I do think Dart needs development. So right now, I don't really want to say I hate the pick because we don't know what's going to go on with Aaron Rodgers, but if A-Rod does become a Steeler, then I wouldn't necessarily hate this pick. I wouldn't love the pick still because I think you could probably feel better about taking a receiver here, or not a receiver, a corner here or something else here over Dart. But I guess at the same time, the Steelers did address receiver with DK Metcalf. Although I don't love the fit, but they still did. They addressed corner with Darius Slay, so they kind of did address some of their needs. So I guess I'm talking myself into it. Again, I don't think Jackson Dart's worthy of a first-round pick. But if you are the Steelers, if you do take the swing on Aaron Rodgers, you let him develop for a year or two underneath him, I think it could make some sense. Again, I don't know. Jackson Dart as a first-round pick feels very rich in my opinion. But again, I can see why people do like Jackson Dart. Again, I think he has the intangibles, good arm strength, good look to him, good physique to him. So yeah, I don't know. 22, McMillan falls all the way to 22. I'd really be interested to see why he has McMillan falling this way. He says, I won't be shocked if McMillan goes in the top 8 picks or if he slides into this section of round 1. There is a wide range of potential landing spots for the former Arizona star, but the team that drafts him will be getting a receiver with incredible size, body control, and good ball skills. Yeah, I'm a little surprised he falls all the way to pick 22. I think there's several teams ahead of this pick that would love to have a long, rangy, good ball skill receiver that can do a lot of big things. Again, the Dallas Cowboys need that. So there are several teams that I think could be maybe a better fit for Ted McMillan. I don't hate his fit for the LA Chargers because he can easily be that wide receiver 1 next to Ladd McConkey, or wide receiver 2 next to Ladd McConkey, however you want to put it. And then Quentin Johnson could be a bit more of like a gadget guy. So I don't hate this pick at all here. They definitely do need receiving help, especially now that they have Najee Harris in the building. But I have a hard time imagining Ted Terrell McMillan being this far down the board. Like, I think he's a really good prospect, and I don't want to sit here and say he's the greatest receiving prospect ever. But again, I look up the board here, and like Seattle could use him, the Cowboys could use him, the Bears maybe, the Saints, the Panthers, the Jets. Like, there's a lot of teams that could have taken McMillan, and he falls to 22 in this mock draft. But I don't know, it feels a little rich to me. I don't really like that. Green Bay takes Maxwell Hairston. This is a team that needs a cornerback. They're going to probably lose Jair Alexander, or even if he does come back, his injury history is pretty intense at this point. Yes, you would like to maybe add an edge rusher next to Rashawn Gary, but cornerback room, especially if Alexander is gone, is not looking very good. So taking Maxwell Hairston, I think, makes some sense. Now, is it a bit of a reach? Maybe, but I mean, Maxwell Hairston showed out at the combine. I think his film is pretty decent. He's a great, he can get you some turnovers, and you pair Maxwell Hairston, who's a very opportunistic cornerback that can make some plays, next to somebody like Xavier McKinney, and I think this defense could really create a lot of turnovers next year if this is the ultimate pick. Nick Emanwari to the Minnesota Vikings. I think this one also makes a lot of sense. The Vikings love versatile secondary guys who can just play multiple positions. They can play corner, safety, nickel, so on and so forth. Nick Emanwari is just that. He's probably more of a strong safety who also can fill inside at linebacker. I think there's some flaws to his game. I don't necessarily think he is the best at setting or at filling a gap. Like, there have been multiple occasions where I saw on film where he's supposed to fill in at a gap and he's a little bit tentative and doesn't quite get downhill enough. So I think for his sake, if he is going to be that versatile guy who can sometimes play within the box, he's definitely going to have to fix that portion of his game. But I think he's really good in coverage. Like, there are some reps in coverage where he is extremely sticky. Sometimes he can even play at like corner. So I think he has a lot of good versatility, great size, good speed. He's a good athlete. So I just want to see it on the field a bit more consistently. So if you're Minnesota, you have a great defensive coordinator. You can probably get the best out of Nick Emanwari. So I have no issues with this one. Banks falls all the way to pick 25. Again, kind of similar to McMillan. I think Banks is probably going to go a little bit earlier. But if he, for whatever reason, is to fall to pick 25, then I would really like this pick for the Houston Texans. You lose Laramie Tunsil. The offensive line absolutely reeks right now. So if you could add a Kelvin Banks in here who can be your future left tackle of the future, I think it makes a lot of sense. Keep him in Texas. He's a fantastic player. Again, prospect fatigue is kind of, hurting some players, and I think Kelvin Banks is kind of a victim of it. They're kind of nitpicking all of his flaws. I think he's one of the best pass blocking tackles in this year's class, if not the best. Run blocking wise, it's not perfect by any means, but he definitely has the ability to do it. It's just he needs some refinement in that department. But man, I love his game. I think he's a great player. Again, maybe I'm biased because I'm a Texas fan, but I mean, this dude played at Texas for 3 years and never had a single issue, like, ever. Like, I mean, even the Georgia game where people say he got exposed, he really didn't. Quinn Ewers got exposed, not Kelvin Banks. I mean, so yeah, I just think Banks is a fantastic player, and it would be a great pickup for the Houston Texans here. The LA Rams take Trey Amos. Now Trey Amos is somebody who's another interesting corner prospect where I could see him going in the first or going in the second. The LA Rams addressed a lot of their needs in free agency, but I will admit, I don't know if I would reach on Amos here, but at the same time, if you do view him as being that good of a prospect, I don't think you overthink it. Good size, good speed, good athlete. I think he shows really good technique. His ability to flip his hips is really solid. So yeah, I don't hate the pick at all here for the LA Rams. It does fill a huge need for them. So 27, Baltimore takes Derek Harmon. This team could definitely use some juice in the defensive line. Derek Harmon showed last year that he could be a very good disruptor up the middle. And you look at a team like Baltimore that could use more disruptors on the defensive line. I mean, you saw what the Eagles were able to do to the Kansas City Chiefs. If you want guys who can be disruptors, I do think Derek Harmon could be the pick here. We'll say Michael Williams is also on the board here. James Pierce Jr. is also here. So maybe I would have went with one of those guys, but I don't hate the Derek Harmon pick at all. 28 Detroit goes Michael Williams. This is somebody who I think is really good as a run stuffer. It's just going to kind of depend a little bit on how much of a pass rushing upside does he have. I think he has a lot of potential, very good size, good athleticism. Again, physicality wise, has all that stuff there, has pretty decent film, played with an injury last year. So a team like Detroit could probably get the best out of him, especially if Hutchinson does come back healthy. All right, Washington goes Azariah Thomas. That's what, 4 or 5 corners going in the first round here. That's a bit interesting. That's the first time I've seen this many corners go this early. Long, rangy cornerback who can match up well with receivers. I think his tape looks really solid. This is a team that does have some question marks with their secondary because outside of Mike Sainristil and outside of Marshawn Lattimore, there is some question marks about who's going to be that second corner. Is it going to be Noah Igbenogany? Is it going to be the guy they brought in free agency? We'll have to wait and see, but I do think there's some options there, so maybe I would have rather them taken James Pierce Jr. again, but I could understand it if maybe you want to go, if maybe you do want to go cornerback to just kind of shore up the secondary as much as possible, but again, I probably would have taken an edge rusher here. Buffalo takes Kenneth Grant. Yes, you bring in Larry Ogunjobi, but again, suspension, which is crazy, by the way. Kenneth Grant is a great player. I'm surprised he falls all the way to pick 30. I think his tape looks really good, very good upside, great athlete, long, wiry, big build. I think he'd be a disruptor up the middle for Buffalo. Kansas City takes Josh Simmons. Josh Simmons falls to the late end of the first round here. Yes, you signed Jalen Moore, but it's not 100% sure that he's going to be the full-time starter. Josh Simmons steps in and potentially can play guard, potentially could play tackle. Either way you look at it, you're going to have a lot of really good pieces there to kind of build out your offensive line. Just kind of have to find where they're going to fit in there. And you got some good depth regardless of, what ends up happening there with the offensive line. So I like the pick. And lastly, Shamar Stewart to the Philadelphia Eagles. This one's really curious to me because I've seen so many mock drafts have Shamar Stewart going as early as like within top 15. So to see him falling to pick 32 for the first time in a while is a bit shocking here. I think there's going to be some teams that will take a flyer on Shamar Stewart because of his build, his athleticism. Productivity is not there, but he is a disruptor. If Philadelphia gets Shamar Stewart, they're going to get the absolute most out of them. So I would love the pick for Philadelphia. But again, I think he's likely going to end up going a little bit earlier. But again, Daniel Jeremiah knows more than me, so I don't know. But you guys let me know in the comment section below. What do you guys think of Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft? Was it good? Was it bad? Let me know. Love you guys. Peace.